Good evening, everyone. This week's Parsha is Parsha Lech-Lecha Tafshin Pei Gimel. So for the first item for tonight, need to read a few of the first psukim, the first verses here in the Parsha. V'yimar Hashem al Avram, Hashem said to Avram, Lech-Lecha me'artzecha, go for yourself from your land, me'oladetecha, from your birthplace, me'beis havicha, from the house of your father, el ha'aretz asher areka, to the land that I will show you. Ve'escha l'goy gadol, I shall make you into a great nation. V'barechecha, I shall bless you. V'gad l'shemecha, I shall make your name great. V'yeh bracha, and you shall be for blessing. V'barachem v'barechecha, I will bless those that bless you. Mekalelcha a'ar, those who curse you, I will curse. V'nivrecha v'chol kol mishpachos ha'adama, all the families of the land shall be blessed through you. That is the first message that Hashem gives to Avram. Leave your land. Go to the land I will show you, which is the land of Canaan, the land of Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, and there I will give you all these blessings. So the Torah says, Vayelech Avram kasher diber elav Hashem, and Abraham went as Hashem spoke to him. Vayelech ito Lot, and Lot, who was his nephew, as we'll see soon, went with him. Va'Avram and chamesh shana v'shivim shana, Abram was 75 years old, but Tzaisai mei Charan, when he left Charan. Abraham, as described in last week's Parsha, started off in Ur Kasdim, went to Charan, and in Charan, he was told to go to the land of Canaan. Vayikach Avram and Sarai Ishtay, Avram took Sarai, his wife, Vasloit ben Achiv and Lot, the son of his brother. That's called Rechushim Asher Rechashu, and all the possessions that they had acquired. V'sanefesh Asher Asu b'Charan, and the souls that they had made in Charan. Vayetzu Leleches Artz Canaan, they went out to go to the land of Canaan. Vayavo Artz Canaan, and they came to the land of Canaan. Vayavar Avram ba'aretz, Avram passed through the land ad Mekayim Shechem, until the place of Shechem, ad Elon Moreh, until the area of Elon Moreh. Vaknani az ba'aretz, and the Canaanite was then living in the land. Vayera Hashem al Avram, and Hashem appeared to Avram. Vayomer, and he said, Azaracha atenes haaretz hazais, to your children I will give this land. Even Shamizbeach Lashem Anira Elav, and he built there an altar to God who appeared to him there. So we have Hashem telling Abraham, leave Haran, go to the land I will show you. There you'll receive great blessings. Abraham goes. He goes to Canaan. He travels into the land of Canaan. And then Hashem appears to him and tells him that this land will be given to his children. Now, so what the commentary of Arachayim points out the following. And that is that the first time Hashem speaks to Avram, it doesn't say Hashem appeared to Avram. It just says Hashem said to Avram, go for yourself from this land. After he's in the land of Israel, after he has followed Hashem's command, then it says, before Hashem speaks to him and tells him that this land will go to your descendants, there it says Hashem appeared to Avram. So the first time there's no mentioning of appearing to Avram before he speaks. And this time it says Hashem appeared to Avram before he spoke. And the Arachayim points out that the regular order of things, as we see by other prophets, is that Hashem should be appearing first to Avram and then speaking. And this very first time that Hashem speaks to Avram, we don't have that. We just have Hashem speaking to him. And the question is why? Why is there no mentioning here of Hashem appeared to Avram, as we see a few verses later, and as what we find by the other prophets in the Torah? So the Chaim answers, very interesting answer. When the Torah tells us in Pasuk Zayin in verse 7 that Hashem appeared to Avram, that means that Abraham experienced a revelation. He experienced the Shekhinah, the divine presence of Hashem. There's a certain experience with Hashem that the prophet has, and then he receives his message. That experience was missing the first time Hashem spoke to Avram. And the reason is because if we look at where Avram is at right now, Avram is really at a very great place in the sense that before him, practically no one was believing in God. He had no connection to belief in God, and he came to believe in Hashem on his own, which is a tremendous accomplishment. But as the Arachayim points out, he was starting a new line. There was no sanctity before him. He didn't come from a line of sanctity. He was starting a line of sanctity. He was starting to believe in Hashem when no one else was. He was at a starting point. At this starting point, Hashem wants to see in Avram, is he actually going to abide by his belief and his faith? If Hashem tells him to do something, if Hashem gives him a challenge, will he do it? Until he does it, until he actually receives a commandment, until he actually receives a challenge, until he actually shows that he really lives by his faith, he is not going to have Hashem appearing to him. That benefit, that experience that the prophet has beforehand isn't going to come to Avram until he proves himself, until he brings his potential into reality. When Avram once Avram shows that he's ready to listen to the mitzvah, he's ready to listen to a commandment from God, he's ready to withstand a challenge from Hashem. When that happens, after that, Hashem appears to him. He's proven himself. He's proven himself worthy of the Shekhinah appearing to him before he speaks to him. But until then, with everything that he accomplished until now on his own, he still had not yet fulfilled Hashem's command. And until then, he is not worthy of having the Shekhinah meet with him. He's not worthy of that experience before his prophecy. But once he does the mitzvah, once he follows the directive of Hashem, and he takes his potential, brings it into reality, after that point, Hashem appears to him. The other prophets, thanks to Avram, they're already part of a line of sanctity. Moshe, before Hashem spoke to Moshe, Hashem spoke to him from the burning bush. That was a revelation of the Shekhinah, the divine presence to Moshe. Moshe could have that revelation because he already was well established within a line of sanctity started by Abraham and continued with Yitzchak, Yaakov, etc. Moshe is already can be worthy of the Shekhinah, but Abraham is starting anew. And when he's starting anew, he cannot have the experience of the Shekhinah until he actually fulfills a command from Hashem. That's a very interesting comment from the Orach Chaim into why this first time Abraham does not have an appearance from Hashem. Until he does a mitzvah, until he establishes that he's ready to follow the commands of Hashem, not just to believe and even fight for the belief in Hashem, but he's ready actually to receive a directive and fulfill a commandment and a challenging one, then already he becomes worthy of establishing the sanctity in himself, that he now would be worthy of having the Shekhinah, divine presence, meet with him before he is spoken to. Okay. Now the next comment I want to share with you, next item, is the question of the Ramban, Nachmanides. Now, if we just look at these verses that we've read, Hashem says to Avram, leave your land, and if you do so, I'll make you a great nation. We have no idea why leaving the land is going to make him a great nation. We also have no idea who Avram really is up to this point of time. There's no mentioning in the Torah how Avraham was a very righteous person. It just we're introduced to Avraham in last week's Parsha, and Hashem speaks to Avram. We have no idea who he is. Now, typically, as the Ramban points out, when Hashem blesses a person, when Hashem rewards a person, we typically find that Hashem says, walk in my ways, follow my commandments, and you'll be rewarded. That's what typically precedes Hashem's telling someone or us about reward. You follow my ways, then you'll be blessed. But we don't see anything about Avram following Hashem's ways, that he's a righteous person following Hashem's ways. Hashem tells him, you do this, you become a righteous person. We see no mention of his righteousness, which is typically what is mentioned before reward is promised. And we have no idea why leaving the land is a reason to be blessed. So Ramban explains that what's really happening is that there's background here that the Torah doesn't mention, but we have it as part of Medrash, part of the Torah Shalapeh, part of our oral law, which is the fact that Abraham, on his own, as we mentioned before, when he lived in Ur Kasdim, where he was born, Abraham came with a belief in Hashem. He began to spread that belief. And because of that, he found himself in lots of trouble. Those who did not follow him, those who did not want to believe in Hashem, abused him, tortured him, degraded him, insulted him, embarrassed him. Nimrod, according to Midrashim, threw him in a pit, then eventually threw him into a fire. Avraham suffered tremendously in Ur Kasdim for his belief in Hashem. And when we learn at the end of Parshas Noach, that Terach took his family, which meant Avraham and Sarai and Lot, and they left Ur Kasdim. They were leaving to go to the land of Canaan. The Ramban says that original plan was that Avraham was going to leave Ur Kasdim and go to the Canaan, which is Eretz Yisrael, which is, as the Ramban called Eretz HaNivcheres. Avraham already knew that land is a chosen land. It's the land with the greatest connection to Hashem, and that if he goes if he would go there to spread the belief in Hashem, there he would be more accepted and more successful. So Terach originally left Ur Kasdim because Avraham had to get out of there, and they stopped in Haran. That's where they settled. After Terach dies, Hashem says to Avraham, "Go to the land of Canaan. Finish up your original plan. Follow your original plan. Your original plan was to go to Canaan and spread the belief in Hashem there, where they respect you, they'll accept you. And that's what you should do. Continue there. And what will be there? I'll make you a great nation. I'll bless you. Those who bless you will be blessed. Those who curse you, I will curse." The point is that Hashem is telling him, the reason why going to the land brings all these blessings is because Avraham had already given up so much for the belief in Hashem. And now Hashem is telling him, follow your original plan to continue to the land of Eretz Yisrael, to the land of Canaan, spread the belief in Hashem there, and there you'll be accepted, and you'll be honored, and you'll be revered. That's what's happening here. That's what it means. Go from your birthplace, go to the land I will show you, go to the land of Canaan, and I'll make you a great nation there. I'll bless you. Those who bless you, I will bless. You'll go there, and your mission of spreading the belief in Hashem there will be one that'll be much more successful, much more respected. You won't have all the suffering and degradation that you had to go through in Ur Kasdim. That's what's happening here, says the Ramban. Now the question is, according to says the Ramban, why doesn't the Torah mention any of this? There's no mention. It would seem, again, we're kind of left in the dark. Why wouldn't the Torah tell us more about what's going on here? So Ramban answers, interestingly, is that the Torah does not want to really get into Avraham's debates and fights with other people about the belief in Hashem. According to Ramban, it seems that if the Torah gets into it, the Torah has to describe Avraham's debating and his philosophical arguments and what the idolaters believed. The Torah doesn't want to do that. And he talks about how we know that during the generation of Enosh, one of the descendants of Adam, that is when idol worship, pagan worship, what we call Avodah Zarah, began. Rambam in his Laws of Avodah Zarah elaborates on that. But there's no elaboration of that in the Torah. Says the Rambam, the Torah didn't want to get into it. The Torah doesn't mention it. The Torah doesn't want to mention this kind of anti-God belief. Doesn't want to get into it. I mean, eventually we're given the prohibitions about Avodah Zarah. But to get into how Avodah Zarah developed and to get into Abraham's debates and quarrels and fights with the idol worshippers, Torah doesn't want to get into that. Torah doesn't mention it. So therefore, we rely on the oral law to know what is going on here. But what's going on here is that Abraham is being told, continue the land of Israel, continue your mission in the place where your mission will meet greater success and with greater respect. Why it's not mentioned is because the Torah doesn't want to start getting into the philosophy of the idolaters. The commentary of Maharal in Netzach Yisrael has a different explanation. And it's very interesting the way he lays it out. The way the Maharal explains it is the Maharal says the following. Because if, let's say, the Torah, meaning he's addressing the question as to why the Torah doesn't mention Abraham's righteousness before should say Abraham was a great tzaddik and he gave up a lot for Hashem, for belief in Hashem. He can't believe in Hashem on his own. He fought for it. He spread it to people. He brought the belief of Hashem into the world. Why is that not mentioned before Hashem speaks to him and says, Lech-Lecha, go? It would clearly give us an understanding as to why Abraham is being told to go and why he's being blessed. He's being blessed because of what he did and what he's going to continue doing. Why no mention? Asked the Maral. So the Maral, this is addressing the Ramban's question, Nachmanides' question. Maral answers in the following way. Because if Abraham's righteousness would have been mentioned before Hashem tells him, Lech-Lecha, the implication of that would have been that it's the reason why, if it would have mentioned his righteousness, it would have implied that it's because of that righteousness that Hashem appeared to him and told him, go from your land. It would have been because of that merit, of that righteousness that he lived by. Now, what's important to understand is the Maral understands that this Lech-Lecha me'artzecha, go from your land, go to Canaan, and as we read further on, Hashem says, to your children I will give this land. This is where Avram is being chosen. This is where Avram is being chosen by Hashem to be the one that will develop the nation of God. This is where this is where it starts. So if the Torah first mentions his righteousness, the implication of that is that why is Avram being chosen? Why is he meriting all these blessings? Because of the righteousness that he lived by until now. And that would have created, borrowing a term from Pirkei Avos, a love that is dependent on something. And a love that's depending. Hashem's love for Avram is dependent on the fact that Avram was so righteous. And if at a point of time that righteousness of Abraham goes away, then the love goes away. The and meaning the Torah doesn't mention his righteousness before Hashem tells him, go from your land, then that means that promise, that expression of love, that chosenness of Abraham is not because of Avram's righteousness. That if that would have happened, you would have said that if the cause goes away, the love goes away. Because there'll be a point of time where the merit of the forefathers will end. Meaning, Avram is righteous, Avram is chosen. But what happens to his descendants? What happens if later on his descendants don't live up to Avraham's example? And they can't even use Avram's merit anymore because they're not living up to it. They're not living by what Avram stood for. Then the Imkain then the chosenness of Avram would go away. Therefore, the Torah doesn't mention his merit. To say this chosenness is not dependent on any merit. And therefore, it's impossible for this love, for this chosenness to ever go away. So the Maral is saying that if the Torah would have mentioned the righteousness of Abraham first, then that would have implied that Abraham is being chosen because of his righteousness. And that chosenness is meant to last for his descendants, as Hashem says, this land I'll give to your descendants. But if Avram's chosenness comes because of his merits, because of his righteousness, that means that chosenness is dependent on his righteousness. And if at that point of time that righteousness goes away because his descendants aren't following Avram's example, then the love goes away, the chosenness goes away. So therefore, the Torah doesn't mention it. The Torah doesn't mention that when Avram is chosen, he's told Lech-Lecha, the Torah doesn't mention his righteousness to say that the chosenness is not dependent on anything. Hashem is choosing him. Now, essentially, did Hashem just choose Avram out of the blue? No. Avram merited it. But by the fact that the Torah doesn't mention his righteousness, predicating the chosenness, that means Hashem chose Abraham independent of the merit. That could have been the cause. That could have been the reason why Hashem chose him, but the chosenness is independent. It's as if it's random. It has no connection to Abraham's righteousness. We know that's why Hashem chose Abraham. They didn't choose him. He didn't choose him dependent on that. He chose him in a way that said, I'm choosing you independently. I love you. I'm choosing you independent of anything else. We know the truth is, we know that Hashem loved Abraham and it chose Abraham because of what he did. But the fact that the Torah doesn't mention it when the Torah talks about the chosenness means to say that chosenness is not dependent on that. The chosenness is just chosen. Hashem chose Abraham. That's it. It's not dependent or connected to anything else. The reason we know, but it's not connected to that. It's not dependent on that. If the Torah would have said the righteousness first, then, at one point I was wondering, does the Maharal mean to say it would have been implied? And that's what we would have thought. And that's what people would think. That's what people would claim, which we know as history went on, that there were nations that did claim the chosen and still do claim that the chosen of the Jewish people is over. Or does the Maharal mean that if the Torah would mention it, then that's if that's how the Torah lays it out, then that is how it is. That's its nature. That's its essence. And now the Torah doesn't mention it, then it's not established that way. If the Torah mentions his righteousness, and that would imply that the chosenness came from that, was connected to that, was directly connected to that, then that means the setup of things would have been that without the righteousness, the chosenness would go away. Now the Torah doesn't set it up that way. The Torah doesn't mention it. That means there is no setup in the Torah of a connection between the chosenness and Avram's righteousness. And that means that Avram being chosen is independent of that. It's on its own. It's as if Hashem just loved him, fell in love with Avram, and chose him. That's it. And that's an important thing. That because of that, that's why no matter what happens with Avram's descendants, no matter how unworthy they are, the chosenness of Avram continues with them forever. And it's that chosenness that gives us the ability to come back and to be brought back. So that's according to the Maharal, why the Torah didn't mention his righteousness. We know his righteousness, and we know that's the cause for why he was chosen. But the fact that the Torah didn't mention it means to say that his chosenness is independent of that, which means that even if his descendants aren't like Abraham, the chosenness of Abraham will still continue with them. Have a wonderful evening.